Educational researchers have argued that majority-minority demographic transformation in the United States would be a significant concern for teacher educators. This majority-minority demographic transformation has already happened in U.S. public schools. The Nashville Metropolitan School District, with an enrollment of 81,407 students, has experienced a demographic transformation consistent with the national trend. According to the district, 67.5% of students are Black, Hispanic, or Native American. 44.3% are economically disadvantaged. 16.8% are English language learners, and 13% have disabilities. In light of this demographic transformation within U.S. public schools, research has shown that pre-service teachers, that's you, are not graduating teacher preparation programs prepared to teach students who are minoritized and marginalized. This lack of preparation leaves a void in teachers' capacity to effectively teach minoritized and marginalized students, a void in which Gay, 1993, and Castro, 2010, referred to as the socio-cultural gap, which is the social and cultural distance between teachers and their minoritized and marginalized students. And so, Dr. Cormier, I want to kind of start there, having framed the discussion about this minority-majority shift, right, and kind of what it means for educators. So first, before I kind of get into, my first question, let's get right into it. So we just talked about the social cultural gap. Tell us, in your perspective, what it means to be responsive to that social cultural gap, i.e. through cultural responsiveness. We hear that term quite a bit, right? We've all heard cultural relevance, we've all heard cultural responsiveness. So in your perspective, give us some insights on what that means.
All right, so I guess when I think about the social cultural gap and then having the tools to mitigate that gap, I like to draw on the work of Geneva Gay, Lucas Villegas, cultural responsive teaching. So it's essentially a practical framework, a lens that allows you to be responsive to students in a way that does them no harm. But I think the big caveat to that is, but before you can even do those things, you really got to do a lot of self-interrogating of yourself, understanding your own biases, the things that you bring into the classroom, and how those biases may affect your teaching, good, bad, or indifferent. So culture responsive teaching is just being mindful of yourself, being mindful of the context, and then responding accordingly to make sure that teaching and learning is happening, but also those students' agencies are maintained in the process.
So by using that term, do no harm, it appears that you're implying that that's a possibility within our school spaces. In doing no harm, I wonder if you care to unpack that just a bit so that we can kind of set up for these educators kind of what the dynamics of this are, what the potential for doing harm, and just how that kind of plays out. If you could kind of deal with that just a bit for us.
Yeah, when I think about harm, and a lot of it is unintentional. So, but I would just kind of characterize some of the things that materialize in schools. So like micro and macro aggressions. Maybe you have, are y'all familiar with microaggressions? You heard that term? So essentially maybe I'm tall, Black, you may assume that I was an athlete. That's a microaggression. You might didn't mean anything by that, but you didn't offer the rest of the world to me. Or maybe a student comes from a single parent home and then you have all these, you make judgments based on this kind of narrative in our country that we use to classify that student.
Or you're articulate.
Yeah.
Black.
Yeah, are you articulate for a black man? Or we got deficit views. You know, that's another form of harm where you're looking at students from a deficit lens. I teach in a Title I school, right? My students don't have X, Y, Z. Did you interrogate it? Did you know that? And even if some of those realities are true, are you taking into account the historical factors that put that student in that position in the first place? So those are like two examples of harm. And obviously there's, psychological harm, and in some cases physical harm. I know we've probably seen a video with the school resource officer snatching the woman out of the chair. So these are things that are really happening in our schools, and I think as teachers, you have a responsibility to be an agent of change and advocate on your students' behalf.
If I could, I'd like to also offer for you social promotion, right? Our student can get beat in the 10th grade and not know how to read, right? Disproportionate discipline, where black and brown students are expelled and suspended at tremendously higher rates based off of things such as these microaggressions also might lend themselves to things like subjective discipline versus objective discipline, where you may say, well, Malik, I don't like your tone, right? Get out of my class, right? Whereas Paul might not get the same subjective discipline versus objective discipline. Hey, you're 3 minutes late for class, right? And so there's a lot of research out there. Smith and Harper, 2015, did a huge study on disproportionate discipline. For any of you who want to look into that. So then, many have suggested, Dr. Cormier, that the fix to some of these cultural responsive issues, right, would be to develop an equity mindful approach. So if you could speak to this term, equity mindfulness, and unpack that, if you will.
Yeah, I think equity is one of those words that's kind of thrown around and people don't always apply it and adapt it in the right context. Sometimes it get conflated with equal, like equality. So I think it's first is important to kind of unpack those two. I'm sure we all seen that famous picture with the kids with the fence, looking over the fence for the baseball game. You know, the shorter kid had 3 books, the tall kid had no books, and the medium kid maybe had 1 book to stand on. So that's a good visual of understanding what equity is versus equality. Equality would give all of the kids the same book to stand on. 2 of those kids probably would never see the game. But I think when we think about equity mindfulness, it comes out of some work from out of USC. And it's really doing school change, individual change, in a way that centers race, it centers culture. It's really naming what we try to discuss with equity. A lot of people will try to kind of wiggle their way out these conversations or these actions, because a lot of time when you're doing equity work, on the front end, it may look like you're doing something more for one group of students versus other. But if you scale back and look at it, well, this equity is really addressing all the inequities that happen in the first place. So to fix it properly, you do have to maybe infuse a large sum of resources to actually get that person to catch up. Resources could be money, resources could be your time. As a teacher, you may have to devise after-school programming or, work during your lunch hour to get students caught up, So I think when I think about equity, it's taking into account the context, it's taking into account the individual, it's really taking into account history. We do live in America and we do have some historical things that led us here, and it's doing the work. And it's hard work. It's a tall task. So equity mindfulness is not an easy job, and it's not something that you can solve with a couple conversations in a day. Sometimes it may take a couple years to get students caught up. But if everybody's working on this together, indeed those students can be caught up.
So that actually segues nicely into the next point of consideration I want to offer up for you all and have Dr. Cormier speak on. So we've heard the term before, a rising tide raises all boats, right? And so you as educators will probably move into various districts, hopefully in the state of Tennessee where you do good work, right? And that day when you walk into the Board of Education or to the district or to the school, you will probably see some sort of mission statement on the wall, which says, we, the educators of the Tennessee, Department of Education, work in the interest of equity and inclusion for the academic achievement of all students, right? You'll most likely see that word, all students, right? And so the common, traditionally understood way to go about doing that is to improve our practice as educators, right? To find out what the best practices are and to apply them across the spectrum of our student populations with the hope that all students will perform and do well, right? A noble aspiration indeed. However, there is a consistent achievement gap that has perennially, longitudinally affected certain groups of students. And so I think that's why we're having this conversation. It's an opportunity for us to think critically about equality versus equity, as Dr. Cormier alluded to, and also think about the students that are suffering from this achievement gap. And so, as young educators, I want to challenge you to think about whether or not you know your students, right? And what the challenges are for their education that they're facing, right? So now, knowing your students is something, Dr. Cormier, as you know, has been talked about quite a bit from folks like Geneva Gay, as you mentioned, Villegas and Lucas, Lance and Billings and others. So give us your perspective on that type of reflection and what it means to actually know your students and how serious that work is.
Yeah, I mean, I think in my personal, professional, so I guess a lot of this stems from my own personal background. So I guess I've been in constant state of reflection my whole life. So I'm a product of foster care. I grew up in a boys' home. So I'm quote unquote that statistic, right? But so I think those lived experiences has put me in a good position to begin to understand students. That's probably why I became a teacher, because the people who stood in the gap for me when I was coming up was teachers. So, and I guess this is me trying to, kind of pay the profession back. So that's that. And then secondly, actually my old assistant principal is here, Ms. Chapman, and I remember some things that we had to do, and I've done this, so I taught in New Orleans and I taught in Jacksonville, Florida, and simple things, home visits. I remember, when I came to KIPP Jacksonville, some of the teachers didn't want to do the home visit. They didn't want to go. I'm not going to those students' houses. So, so knowing your students is, and I think Bell Hooks talks about this the best in engaged pedagogy, is making yourself vulnerable. Students are the best BS leaders. Y'all probably heard that. And if you don't make yourself vulnerable and malleable, to actually ignite that teacher-student relationship, you won't have one. Are they gonna see you as a teacher, right? So, and then a part of, getting to know your students is really listening to them and trying to create opportunities that that you connect their education to, right? So I remember at this, I love fishing, so I started a fishing club, but the fishing club wasn't just a fishing club. The fishing club was kind of designed to try to teach some strands in science. So bodies of water, predator-prey relationships, moon phases, that was just my way to try to, and then teach students to be resourceful. So there was a life lesson out of that. There was also some science that got learned with that opportunity. But I would say the essence of improving that relationship is being vulnerable in spite of all the things that you're going to be asked to do as a teacher. I think I read somewhere teachers make 1,000 to 3,000 decisions a day. I get it, it's a very stressful job, but one thing that can mitigate that stress is actually knowing your students. Because when you know your students and they respond to the way you treat them, the teaching it works on its own. I mean, now you got that student engaged, they want to work for you. They want to, they are motivated by their relationship and they don't want to let you down. So that's kind of how I think about that.
Thank you. So, very interesting. So you touched on culturally relevant teaching there, right? Thinking outside the box in your pedagogical strategies, right? So we talk a lot of ed leadership stuff, but your experience as a science teacher, which I failed to mention, I'm remiss on that. But that experience really kind of unpacks for these young educators, I believe, the mindset that we have to kind of meet students where they are, right? There may be limitations in what you may, think is appropriate for you to teach students, right? And without kind of understanding where they are, where they come from, right? You might have some difficulty in doing that. A great educator told me once that you cannot teach a student who does not trust you. And so I think that's critical to that. Here's something that I'm seeing that is very consistent with the trend. 80% or so of the teacher workforce, as it's been reported, is comprised of nearly 80% white female women. Consistent with what we're seeing in the room, right? And so your strategy that you just underlined, right, I believe, if we look at that in the right context, gives these young educators hope for how you may be able to engage students of diverse backgrounds, right? Hopefully that's not a fire drill. Just gonna act like I don't hear that. Just gonna act like I don't hear that. Because this is a great thing, and I hope that some of you have questions for Dr. Cormier, because we will do a question and answer in just a few moments. But along the lines of bridging that gap between perhaps your background and the background of this increasingly more diverse school system in the Nashville metropolitan area, I want you to kind of think about this. There's a way for us to bridge that gap and to create understanding and allow your influences and your background to have a positive influence on the students that you teach, right? But it will require a couple of things. One, it will require some critical reflection about your background, your perspective on the world, and the things that you value. And the reason why that's important is because when it's juxtaposed against a student who has entirely different background, perspective, and viewpoints in the world, often there's a clash, there's a culture clash with that, right? And that leads to some of those problems that we talked about, disproportionate discipline, et cetera. And if we're not careful, it leads to what is also known as implicit bias, right? So I want you to talk just a bit about implicit bias, if you don't mind, sir.
Yeah, implicit bias, that's probably, one of my favorite areas to kind of think about and work in. I refer to it as implicit bias or unconscious bias, and I just kind of unpack the two. One is backed up by empirical data, and unconscious bias is this, we know something is happening or is happening while these microaggressions or calls to microaggression or caused however you respond to that student, if it wasn't it could happen productive or non-productive way. So implicit bias is just how you react to stimuli. And anybody took the implicit bias test, the one that, it's online, I think it's out of Harvard. It has pictures, black, white, and it asks questions, and essentially you take it, and based on how fast you respond, it tells you if you have potential implicit bias towards, whatever is being studied. So they have one on, black people, they have one on guns. There's all kind of little tests you can take, so I recommend taking that. So it's it happens on a subconscious level. A lot of time you don't even know it, right? You just and it's the consequence of how we are socialized in our country. So pretty much your implicit bias gas tank, if you will, is filled by what you consume. And a lot of times we consume in news, we consume in things our parents tell us. You can't trust them. Oh, you on that side of town. See, we all know what that is. So, and what happens is you take those memories, and when you are confronted with something, you react in a way that probably how you was pre-programmed. A good book to read on this is Whistling Vivaldi, A Stereotype Threat. It talks about that. So, but I think you can disrupt those things by informing yourself and giving yourself, I don't know if any of us can work out or run, but get in the gym. And I don't mean like get in the gym, but like, get into the communities where these students live at. Get comfortable. Well, you're going to get uncomfortable first to get comfortable, but go through that, that practice and that process. And then what's probably going to happen is that implicit bias will begin to change. And then me, I get so, I'm so kind of wired now that, you may redirect your friends. Like, hey, that's probably not a good way to think about that. So that's what implicit bias or conscious bias is. Just pretty much the things you do unconsciously in reacting to a stimuli. In this case, the stimuli is black and brown students, maybe queer students, maybe, I read a case study once where, it's talking about two girls laughing in class. So the black girl laughs just the same volume and decibels as the white girl, but the way that the teacher described the black girl laughing was with a deficit lens, whereas, the white girl laughing, oh, she's engaged in the lesson. But when the black girl was laughing, she's disruptive. So that's kind of how those things materialize and can be problems for students.
And so this is not a hopeless cause here, right? These are some of the considerations that we as educators could be more mindful of, and I would submit that in doing so, we could get to a better place, right, in terms of how we are engaging with our students and the outcomes that we ultimately get from that. So we're gonna next take some questions. I hope you have some feedback and some input, perhaps from your own professional experiences that you want to offer up. There'll be time for you to do that in the next session as well. But real quick, you mentioned several of the architects of this framework, these frameworks that we discussed. So I want to, if you don't mind, just running down a list of some of your hit list, your greatest hits in terms of the research that's available and or some of the frameworks that these students could look into to gain a better perspective. And then we'll take any questions from anyone.
Yeah, and then I will also maybe put these on a list and make sure y'all get them. So I think, the first one, and I like to give people practical things that are tangible and things that you can see results from. So I would think the first one would be Courageous Conversations About Race by Glenn Singleton. I think the book title is what the book title is, but it gives you a lot of tangible things to hold on to. I love people. I may not be a necessary people person, but I just love people. Like, I love watching people, I love interacting with people, and obviously this guy does too. In the way he writes the book, some of these implicit biases we have, he's kind of broken down to this cultural ways of being. There are ways that maybe people from one group versus another group talk, right? Black folks tend to be more expressive, right? So he unpacks that in this book, where maybe when you talk, and he also unpacks in the book, white people, I hate to generalize, but just tend to be very analytical, process-oriented, well, I got pulled over by police over this morning because, I'm black. You sure? Was you speeding? You had to be doing something, you know. So it's that kind of exercise, right? So Glenn Singleton. My second one is Bell Hooks, Teaching to Transgress. The whole book is good, but chapter 1 probably gets you right. You know, chapter 1 is really what you need to do. And then another book is mainly for school leaders, but I think it's a good book too. You can just Google this. It's called Culturally Proficiency, and it just gives you language to actually, because like we say microaggression, but even me, I think that's very myopic. Let's name their interaction. You know, let's actually name, like, you know. So this book does a good job of naming 6 types of different interactions that happen in school on a continuum, and so I think that's a good book to kind of grapple with. So, and then I'll probably share some articles with y'all later. But those are 3 good books in order as I named them. Glenn Singleton, Bell Hooks, Teaching to Transgress, and then Lindsay et al. Cultural Proficiency.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so before we discuss the research that Dr. Cormier has been engaged in and will be engaging with you today, I want to open the floor up for any conversation, discussion from you, pre-service teachers for sure, but also from any other faculty or administrators in the room. Sure.
Their staffs, because I think at this point we'll do that with our faculties if we choose to. Do you think that would be something important to do, to monitor? Because sometimes teachers come in with all the best intentions, and sometimes they're blocked by the leadership of creating a better atmosphere for those students. It's not just that the teachers don't want it, they need the resources and the support of not only school leadership, district leadership.
Yeah. So can we be more intentional about this work from a leadership perspective to set up a culture within our schools?
Yeah, my answer to that is kind of twofold. One, I think in some cases we know better than, I think in a lot of cases we don't know better. That's the problem. So I think the problem is just, you know, a lot of us teach, you know, through apprentice of observation. You know, we essentially mimicking the way we was taught. You know, that's how most of us teach. So so that's that. As far as, you know, so I do research and professional development. So kind of my work is trying to develop essentially a protocol that can be sustained. So I think the number one issue is that, one, and this is what Glenn Singleton books talks about a lot, is facilitating these professional developments. People really don't do a good job. It happens by if someone comes in front of you and tell you what you're doing wrong, and it's hard for the participants to actually center themselves in that context to feel what's being done wrong or whatever, and actually making meaningful transformation. So that's one problem. 2, it's usually done in one day at the end of all the other PD you had that day. So it's like, oh, by the way, we're gonna hit you off with this diversity training, and you're already tired and spent. So now you're tired and spent, and you're trying to have a courageous, difficult conversation that you don't want to have, because the way we socialize in this country, we don't talk about race. We don't do those things. So, in my opinion, it should be like dosed throughout the year, right? So, you know, we'll go to professional development about classroom management all day, every day. Teacher strategies, you know, we do those professional developments every Thursday or once a week. But, you know, maybe once a month, you need to really, you know, have a meaningful, you know, introduction and then sustain that you know, topic throughout the years, not year, but the years. And then, and then you pull people from the community, you pull people that are relevant to your context to sometimes facilitate these. You pull out the outside resources. I think a lot of times schools think all these answers to these problems are within their own, you know, human resources, and that's not the case. A lot of times you need to, the human resources are sometimes right outside your door, you know. Go talk to that community leader, bring them in, bring in the local politician, bring in, maybe that lead booster parent or PTO parent and let them come in and offer some insights. So that's another thing that, critical pedagogy is something I'm very into, and it's really about, and cultural responsiveness. Like one of the big tenets of cultural responsive teaching is that students are cultural resources and tools in their families, and you can use that, so.
Just to echo that point about us not being socialized to have critical conversations about race is a big part of the issue that Dorinda Carter Andrews talks about quite a bit. There's another author for you maybe to look into. Questions? Got a couple questions? Sure. So what resources and literature are available to assist and guide teachers such as yourself with helping and working with a more diverse audience of students? Yes, ma'am. Certainly Dr. Cormier can speak to that, but I want to just interject that Ivory Toldson is a professor at Howard University who he's situated his research around Black males. But in doing so, he noted that we know enough about the problems and the things that are leading to the issues of Black male underperformance in schools, right? What he suggests is that we look more into the success of Black males in schools. And so that might be a guidepost for you to kind of find out where the best practices reside, right? In looking at, and a lot of this data is very much available, especially to you academics, where you can find where the schools that are having the best success at working with diverse audiences and students, right? And there may be some literature around those schools. You may be able to even develop a relationship with that school in order to glean some of those best practices. And so just a quick plug. My dissertation focused on 7 schools in the state of Florida where the achievement gap was reversed. And so I went in and contacted those schools and found some great best practices that I hope to generalize to the public. So that's one strategy. And Dr. Cormier certainly can give you access to other resources that might be helpful in that fight.
Yeah, essentially there's 2 books that come to mind. And I think he kind of said it, but it's really, a lot of time when I would teach, I remember, and I know Ms. Chapman, I was telling myself, let me leave my problems in my truck. So a lot of times we bring our baggage into school, and then now we snap it on students that may be a result of our own issues. And I know I used to work very hard to really try to leave. You know, I had, my daughter lived in a different state. You know, I sometimes out of count, I'm like, man, I'm spending more time with these dudes than my own child. So we have things that we bring into the classroom. And I think first thing is one, leaving that in your car door. When you slam your car door, that's it. Now it's all about the students. Secondly, and I think what Dr. McNeil was just getting at is the deficit views. You know, look for the positive opportunities in your schools. And I think there's 2 books that can kind of help you spotlight those. One is by Chris Emdin. I think it's called For White Folks That Teach in the Hood and the Rest of Y'all Too. So that's the name of the book. So it's a good book. Top seller. And then the other one is by Rich Milner. It's a longer title, but essentially it's like, it's not where you start, it's where you end, something like that. So essentially he gives you these explanatory frameworks of the different things: deficit mindset, low expectations, colorblind racism. That's a big problem, amongst teachers. And I think theoretically colorblind makes sense. Being colorblind makes sense, but you miss the whole point, and you really would never really get at the root of the problem. I think colorblind in theory is just like, I'm going to ignore these things that these students got going on and just teach like my hair's on fire. You can do all that you want, but if you keep ignoring those things, you're going to be literally teaching till your hair is on fire and you're going to burn out quick. So those are 2 good reading sources, and I would put those in the book. Chris Emdin.
EMDIN.
Yeah, EMDIN. I think it's 2016. I'm always citing stuff. So it's 2016. For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood and the Rest of You Too. I think he's wanted me to say it again. And he has a great TED Talk too. He has a couple of TED Talks that are awesome. He's one of my scholar mentors that I look to from afar. I like how he does things, so it's a good resource.
Now, with those 2 questions, I need to also kind of back up with one other source, culturally responsive school leadership, particularly for the young lady who asked our first question, but for both of you, Muhammad Khalifa suggests, right, as others who have talked about school improvement and doing it from a system-wide approach, right? Even beyond education, Peter Senge talked about system-wide change and systems thinking. And all of these folks suggest that the changes that we seek in terms of cultural responsiveness and helping students has to be a system-wide thing, right? That generates from, as high up as the state district level, right? But certainly within a school, you have to have a collective buy-in. It cannot just be this great teacher, this great teacher who are espousing these beliefs within the school, right? It's not enough. It needs to be system-wide. It has to be an adoption. And you alluded to the fact that maybe even to the point that you are speaking to your colleagues about instances and things and situations to help build a stronger school culture in regards to this. Other questions? Any other questions? We're getting towards the end of our little chit chat here. So Dr. Cormier, you have been engaged in not just the theoretical understanding of these topics, which clearly you demonstrated good knowledge of. You've had the practical experience of being an educator, but you've taken it a bit further with regards to the research that you did at Pennsylvania State. And that has resulted in the creation of a tool that we're going to engage with in the next session. So I want to ask you to speak on that, tell us what it is and what it's about and what you hope to achieve by doing this research.
Cool, so essentially the tool was designed to solve a problem. So I went to school at Penn State. I don't know if anyone ever been to Happy Valley, but it's in the middle of nowhere. And I was trying to address a real problem. It's in the middle of nowhere in a predominantly white community, as well as the school being predominantly white itself. However, the thing that troubled me and was an opportunity was that the majority of our teachers was taking jobs in urban schools along the 95 corridor, you know, as well as Pennsylvania, right? So they're getting jobs in New York, Maryland, the DMV area, Carolina, Pennsylvania, and they was going to urban schools, but they wasn't doing their field experiences in urban schools or schools that was relevant to that student population, as well as they wasn't really engaged in discourse regarding their student population. So I was trying to say, well, how can I solve that problem? You know, everybody would say, well, just bus them here and do that. And I say, well, what if I can develop a tool that can like essentially mimic a urban school or a majority minority school? So essentially I developed a tool that has 30 vignettes on there of things that are representative of social cultural interactions that happen in, you know, schools with, you know, a majority minoritized students, as well as to some of the forms of otherization or marginalization. So these 30 vignettes is an intersection of that. So I have things represented LGBT, race, culture, ethnicity, religion, because, you know, when you go to a school, you're gonna see everything. You will see everything. And some of these things came from the literature, some of these things came from experience, some of these things were testimonies, you know. And when you read them, you know, some are microaggressions, some are just outright racism or sexism or whatever it may be. So essentially I made the tool, and essentially the exercise is, you know, these 30 vignettes are broken in 5 different groups related to teaching, like teaching, profession, policy, empathy, just, you know, things that I thought teachers should think about when they go into schools. And it was designed to, well, at first when I designed it, I'll be honest, I was like, hey, they're gonna take it, I'm about to get them, you know. But that's not how research works. So the way the research process works, if you really honor the process of research, you listen to the participants and you take their information and you make tools better. So essentially the tool emerged from one tool where you sort these items based on, you know, how you react to them or your beliefs. And then it turned to a whole tool that essentially gives us an opportunity to have a deep, rich, courageous conversation. And I did it with Dr. Young and Dr. McNeil and Oxa. So you actually have people who actually done it. So it's going to raise and the tool was designed to raise some uncomfortabilities, but in a safe space. What I love about my research, I can say this every time: no students is harmed in this study. You know, no students is harmed in this study. However, a lot of us will go in these classrooms and harm students for real. So my idea was that, what if I made a safe space that they can, now you may have some internal frustration and challenges and dissonance, but we can work through that, you know? And I think that's the thing that I think we owe that to our students, to experience those discomforts until those discomforts become a resource. So now when I get uncomfortable in certain situations, I use it as an opportunity to make inquiries. Like if I meet a person and there's some things about that person that I don't understand, I'm gonna ask a question. So essentially the tool is designed that. So now the tool is morphed into this bigger tool where you do the sorting process. We have you get to react to the ones that came up that warrant further inquiry or dialogue investigation. We have a rubric, so multiple people will rate your responses, and then we can give you a level of cultural proficiency. And it's a momentary thing, right? Today, this is where you are. You know, today's where you are. So hopefully, you know, we participate in this, and then we have a year-long program, well, not a year-long, but we have an 8-week program or something like that designed, and we revisit the tool, and hopefully we can all see our growth. So that's how that's set up.
Excellent. And you will